Have you ever woken up and felt like your life was on mute? Like every day was just a replay of the day before? Same alarm, same coffee, same numbness in your chest you couldn't quite name. They told you to stay grateful, to push through, to smile more. But what if smiling has become the hardest part of your day? There's a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, a kind of silence no music can break, and maybe, just maybe, you've been carrying it for so long you've forgotten what it's like to feel truly alive. But here's a thought. What if you're not broken? What if the problem isn't you, but the story you were told to live? There's something I discovered recently, something small, but it changed everything for me. And I want to share it with you. Thank you for being here. And I hope truly that you'll stay until the end of Boston was wrapped in winter again, streets gray, footsteps heavy, breath visible in the air, and Emily, for the third morning in a row, stood in front of her mirror, wondering if today would feel different. She tied her hair, not because she wanted to, but because it was what she did every morning. Coffee brewed, but she didn't taste it. The subway rumbled underneath her apartment, right on time, and she felt nothing. At work she smiled, not the kind of smile that lights up a face, but the kind people wear to make others feel comfortable. She opened emails, typed words, answered calls, and all the while her chest felt like a locked drawer, one she'd lost the key to. That night, she sat on her couch, a pizza box half eaten, TV playing something she wasn't really watching. And as the credits rolled, something inside her whispered, "Is this all there is?" It wasn't depression, it wasn't drama, it was the quiet ache of a life on autopilot. And in that silence she heard her own voice, barely, a soft, exhausted question. When did I stop feeling? Emily hadn't always felt this way. There was a time she remembered running through rain barefoot in college, crying at songs, laughing until her stomach hurt. But now everything felt filtered, muted, like someone had turned the volume down on her existence. She wasn't miserable, she wasn't failing. But she wasn't living either. In meetings, she nodded when she was supposed to. At dinner with friends, she laughed at the right moments. And on Instagram, she looked fine, but none of it felt real anymore. One afternoon, during a call about quarterly projections, she felt tears rise suddenly. Not because of the topic, but because she realized she'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for 27 minutes and couldn't remember a single number on it. She muted her mic, turned off her camera, and just sat, still, breathing. The silence was deafening. The next day, she called in sick. Not because she was unwell, but because she couldn't imagine pretending for another 8 hours. She stayed in bed until noon. She watched the sunlight crawl across the ceiling. She listened to the hum of the heater. She let her phone ring. And for the first time in weeks, she listened to herself. That afternoon, she walked without a destination, past coffee shops, bookstores, strangers wrapped in scarves. And for a brief second, when a gust of wind lifted her hair, she felt something like freedom. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that breath in the cold, was the beginning of everything. And even though she'd returned to her routines the next day, something had shifted. A seed had been planted. It would take time. It would take doubt and falling and standing back up. But the loop had cracked, and light was slipping through. She didn't smile yet. But her eyes, for the first time in months, blinked with wonder. Sometimes all it takes is one familiar face to remind you that you're not the only one lost. Emily hadn't seen Mia in 3 years. They bumped into each other at a corner bookstore, both reaching for the same paperback. It was awkward at first, smiles, small talk, the usual "how have you been" shuffle. But then Mia said something unexpected. "You look like I used to." Emily froze, unsure whether to laugh or take offense. But there was no judgment in Mia's voice, only knowing. They grabbed coffee around the corner, sat in the quiet hum of a cafe that smelled like cinnamon and paperbacks. Mia stirred her drink slowly, eyes focused on the foam. Then she began to speak. She told Emily about her panic attacks last year, how she'd cried quietly in public restrooms, how she'd watched everyone around her succeed. While she couldn't even reply to emails, Emily listened, heart thudding, because it sounded too close, too familiar. It was like Mia had climbed inside her thoughts and put words to all the silence. "I used to think something was wrong with me," Mia said, her voice almost a whisper. "But I realized I was just tired of living someone else's life." And that hit Emily like a wave, because wasn't that what she'd been doing, living by scripts she never wrote, following rhythms that didn't match her heartbeat, saying "I'm fine" when she wasn't? That evening, Emily went home with a lump in her throat. She opened her journal, the one she hadn't touched since college. The pages smelled dusty, unused, but her pen moved. She wrote, "I met someone who used to be me." She didn't know what that meant fully, not yet, but something in her wanted to understand. In the days that followed, she and Mia messaged here and there. Little things, memes, voice notes, song lyrics. And every time her phone buzzed, it felt like a tiny lifeline. Not because Mia had answers, but because Mia got it. They began to walk on Sundays. No goals, no metrics, just steps and silence and breath. Emily started noticing things again. The way light pooled on the sidewalk at 4 p.m., the sound her boots made on frosty leaves. How laughter didn't feel fake when she didn't force it. Mia never lectured, never offered steps or systems. She just showed up week after week, quietly consistent, and somehow that gave Emily permission to do the same for herself. One Sunday, they sat at their usual bench by the pond. The ducks were louder than usual, children threw crumbs, and Mia turned to her. "You know," she said, "the hardest part isn't starting, it's admitting you've stopped." Emily didn't reply. She didn't need to, because in that moment she knew she'd been paused for far too long, and maybe it was okay to press play, gently. If you've ever felt that too, like you're frozen in a life that doesn't quite fit, you're not alone. You're never the only one. And if this feels like it's about you, it probably is. Maybe you've already started just by listening this far. And that dear one counts more than you know. The first promise she made wasn't loud. It wasn't a New Year's resolution or a declaration on social media. It was a quiet whisper scribbled in the margin of her journal. "Try again." Emily didn't know what that meant exactly. She just knew she was tired of waiting to feel ready. So she picked something simple. Wake up 10 minutes earlier, not to run or meditate or seize the day, just to sit. The first morning she hit snooze twice, but on the third ring she sat up barely awake and watched light creep under her curtains. No music, no plans, just breath and stillness. It didn't change her world, but it did shift her morning. The next day she did it again. And added tea. The third, she took a 5-minute walk before work. Boston was still cold, but the wind didn't sting as much when you walked toward it on purpose. She started noticing the small wins, like making her bed, finishing a full glass of water, not checking her phone until after brushing her teeth. Each one was a thread, a stitch in something new, and she didn't even realize she was weaving. But not every morning was golden. There were days she slept through her alarm. Days she scrolled Instagram for 30 minutes before even getting out of bed. Days she reached for cookies at 10 a.m. and called it breakfast. And those days, a voice returned, the old one, the one that said, "See, you'll never change." But this time she didn't believe it as quickly, because she had evidence now, tiny, fragile proof that she could show up, not perfectly, but consistently. She bought sticky notes and wrote gentle reminders. "You are not behind. Small is still progress. Try again tomorrow." She stuck one on her mirror, one inside her notebook, one above the kitchen sink. They weren't mantras, they were anchors. Sometimes we wait for motivation, we wait to feel ready. But Emily was learning readiness comes from the doing, not before it. One Sunday, as she sipped her tea and watched the sun rise, she smiled, not because everything was better, but because she was there, awake, present, trying, and that was new. She began to track her moods, not to fix them, but to notice them. She'd circle colors in her journal: yellow for lightness, blue for heavy, gray for numb, red for overwhelmed. It wasn't therapy, but it was attention. And attention, she realized, is love in its simplest form. Somewhere along the line, she'd stopped paying attention to herself. And these small habits, tea, color, light, were how she started again. The world didn't applaud, no one threw a party, but Emily felt it. A shift, a movement, like her soul was waking up from a long, quiet sleep. And as she folded her blanket one evening, brushed crumbs off her journal and wrote Day 12 still here, she realized something that made her heart exhale. She didn't want a different life anymore. She wanted to know this one better, even in its quiet, even in its slowness. She was beginning to see that change doesn't knock, it whispers. And if you're quiet enough, you'll hear it. It was a Tuesday morning when it happened. Nothing dramatic. No meltdown, no sudden revelation, just a quiet moment on the subway and a reflection. Emily had chosen a window seat like she always did. She wasn't reading, she wasn't listening to music, she was just watching. Boston's skyline blurred as the train sped through. Her own reflection stared back at her, pale, tired, a little distant. And for the first time she saw it, the absence, not of makeup or energy or sleep, but of light. There was no spark, no trace of that girl who once dreamed big and laughed loudly. She blinked, hoping the glass had distorted it somehow. But it hadn't. Her face was still hers, just quieter. That morning she didn't go to work. She didn't text her boss. She got off 3 stops early, walked out into the cold, and stood on the sidewalk like someone who just escaped a room without windows. She didn't know where to go, so she wandered. Through streets she'd walked 1,000 times, past coffee shops that knew her order, past bookstores where her feet had memorized the creak of the floor. But today everything looked different, not because the city had changed, but because she had paused long enough to see it. She sat on a bench by the river, hands tucked in her coat. And for a while she just breathed, and in that breath something surfaced, not guilt, not shame, just a quiet question. Where did I go? The wind nudged her scarf. A cyclist whizzed past. 2 seagulls fought over a crust of bread. And Emily just watched, feeling like she'd returned from somewhere far away. That evening she opened her closet, and instead of grabbing her usual work outfit, she pulled out a paint-stained sweatshirt she hadn't worn in years. She used to paint, back in college, before internships, before deadlines, before performance reviews. She found her old sketchbook buried under a box of cords and forgotten chargers. The pages were yellowed, but her lines still danced. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that surprised her because it felt real. That night she didn't light candles or meditate or journal. She just sat on her floor, sketching with a pencil too short to hold properly. And the drawing wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She remembered how her hands used to shake with excitement, not caffeine. How colors made her feel things words couldn't. For the first time in a long time she didn't feel like she was fixing herself. She felt like she was finding herself. The next morning she dressed slowly. She tucked the sketchbook into her tote bag, not to show anyone, just to carry it close. And as she passed by the train window she caught her reflection again, still pale, still tired. But this time, the corners of her lips curved, a flicker. If you've ever looked in the mirror and felt like a stranger, if you've ever wondered where you went, maybe you haven't disappeared. Maybe you're just waiting to be seen by yourself again. And that is enough reason to start, even if it's just with a pencil and a little light. The 5th week was supposed to feel easier. It didn't. Emily had strung together nearly 30 mornings of soft starts. Tea, journaling, small walks, no phone before sunrise. She had smiled more, breathed more, even painted twice. But then came the spiral. It started with one bad night. A call from her manager at 8 p.m. A client complaint that wasn't hers to fix, but somehow landed on her desk. She worked until midnight, ate crackers for dinner, and slept with her laptop open. The next morning she didn't wake up early, didn't stretch, didn't make tea. She scrolled. 35 minutes of faces that looked happier, brighter, more alive than hers. Everyone was glowing, launching things, thriving, and she was under a blanket, ashamed of her own breath. She stayed like that all weekend. Didn't reply to text, skipped her Sunday walk with Mia, watched half a season of a show she didn't care about, and ate cereal out of a mug. She thought the old weight had returned, the gray, the dull throb behind her eyes. By Monday the voices were back, the cruel ones. You were never really changing. You just got lucky for a few days. You'll always end up here. And a part of her believed them because she was tired, because change felt like a lie wrapped in a Pinterest quote, because motivation had left her body and she didn't know where to find it again. That evening she tried to journal. The page stayed blank. She tried to walk, but turned back after one block. She tried to paint and cried instead, not loud, just the quiet kind of crying, the one that leaks slowly, wordless and warm. She texted Mia. "I'm slipping," she wrote. 3 dots danced, then disappeared, then returned. Mia replied, "Then fall, I'm here." Emily stared at the message for a long time. Something in her softened. She thought about how harsh she was with herself, how quick she was to measure progress like a finish line, how she'd forgotten that healing wasn't linear. Later that night, she opened her sketchbook. She didn't draw. She just traced the edges of the old pages with her fingers slowly. The next morning she didn't wake up early, she didn't make her bed, but she did sit up and whispered to the room, "I'm still here." She lit a candle, not because she felt like it, but because routine can sometimes hold us when our strength can't. She poured tea. It tasted flat. She drank it anyway. And as she looked out the window at the quiet street below, she remembered something Mia had said weeks ago. Some days are just about staying. So she stayed, not joyfully, not confidently, just stayed. And maybe that was enough. Maybe being present in the mess is its own kind of courage. Because this journey wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering someone old, someone she'd buried under deadlines and filters, under expectation and fear. Someone who knew how to feel without performing, who knew how to rest without guilt. And even though the spiral hadn't vanished, even though she still felt fragile, Emily knew something now. The fall isn't failure, it's part of the return. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply not walk away from yourself. Not this time, not again. It was Thursday afternoon when Emily met him, the man on the bench. She had wandered into the park not to think, not to heal, just to get out of her apartment. Her breath had felt too loud in her room, her thoughts even louder. She found a spot under a bare tree and sat, coat zipped, hands buried, eyes down. That's when he spoke. His voice was slow, worn like denim. "March used to be my least favorite month," he said, staring straight ahead. Emily glanced over. He was old, maybe 70, corduroy jacket, paper bag with half a sandwich. "Everything looks dead," he continued, as if they were already mid-conversation. "But it's not, it's just not ready to bloom." She didn't know why, but her eyes stung. She said nothing. They sat like that for a while, two strangers sharing silence. Eventually he stood, cracked his back, and before walking away he looked at her and smiled. "It's okay to not bloom yet," he said, then disappeared down the path like he'd never been there. Emily stayed frozen. Not because of the cold, but because of the words. "It's okay to not bloom yet." Something in her chest loosened. She walked home slower than usual, not the heavy kind of slow, the kind where you notice things, the sound of twigs snapping underfoot, the way her breath curled into the sky. A blue mitten forgotten on a bench. Back at home, she didn't rush, didn't scroll. She boiled water, folded her blanket, and stood by the window for a full 5 minutes just watching. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "I met a stranger who gave me permission." That word lingered, permission, to be where she was, to feel what she felt, to exist without proof. She realized how long she'd been waiting for signs, for milestones, for someone to say she was enough. And maybe she'd missed the point. Maybe healing isn't about becoming impressive. Maybe it's about becoming honest. The next morning, she woke up and didn't chase productivity. She just lit a candle, a different one, lavender. She opened the window. The cold didn't bite as hard. She still felt messy, still unsure, but she also felt softer. And sometimes softness is a revolution. She texted Mia. "Met someone at the park, old, kind, said something I didn't know I needed." Mia replied with just a heart. That afternoon, Emily dug out her box of old art supplies, brushes, colors, a palette caked with memory. She didn't paint yet. She just cleaned the brushes. Each stroke of water a ritual, as if preparing herself for her own return. It wasn't healing, not exactly, but it was something close. A beginning again, without pressure, without timeline, just the quiet unfolding of a soul remembering itself. And as the sun slid behind the skyline that evening, Emily whispered, not to anyone, just to the air, "I'm not there yet, but I'm not where I was." And that was enough, for now. Emily didn't wake up one day with her life transformed. It came slowly, like light through curtains, like music before the lyrics start. Her rhythm began to shift, not from urgency but from curiosity. What would happen if she built mornings she didn't want to escape from? So she started there. She kept the candle, kept the tea, but added one song each morning, just one, something gentle, piano usually. And instead of rushing through her shower, she allowed water to become a form of prayer. "Thank you, body," she whispered once. It felt strange, but true. Breakfast became less about fuel and more about presence. Berries in a bowl, Greek yogurt, one square of dark chocolate, just because she bought a plant, a tiny one, named it June. "Maybe if I can keep June alive," she told Mia, "that'll mean I'm doing okay." They laughed, but it felt like truth wrapped in humor. Emily started walking in the evenings too, no headphones, just city sounds, shoes on pavement, the occasional bark of a dog. She noticed her thoughts no longer screamed, they spoke. Softer, slower, she began painting again, not every day, but often enough to remember color. And she stopped measuring her worth by her inbox. Work was still there, deadlines, Zoom meetings, but she moved through them differently. Instead of "I have to," she whispered, "I choose to for now." She didn't meditate perfectly. She still checked Instagram too much. She still had nights where cereal was dinner. But those weren't failures anymore. They were just life. She created something she called her Sunday ritual. It wasn't big, a walk, a playlist, a phone-free hour, one letter to her future self. And a bath if she remembered. It gave her week a border, a breath between the days. Sometimes Mia joined, sometimes she didn't, but the ritual stayed, like a soft promise she could keep. One Sunday, while painting beside her window, she paused, looked up, and whispered, "I like this." Not the painting, not even the moment, but herself in that moment. That was new. She didn't need to be brilliant to be worthy of her own presence, didn't need to be healed to deserve her own softness. She was learning that wholeness isn't a destination. It's a way of meeting yourself daily, meeting yourself with grace, with space, with enough room to change your mind and still be kind. The world still rushed outside, buses honked, news moved fast. But inside her apartment, time obeyed her. She was the conductor now. And she chose a slower song. That evening, as she brushed her hair in the dim light, she looked at her reflection again. And for once she didn't look for proof, she just smiled. Not because she had arrived, but because she had returned. If you've ever longed for a life that feels like yours, not the one expected of you, maybe it begins with rituals that feel like home. Not impressive, just real. And maybe, just maybe, you're allowed to choose peace even when you don't feel perfect. Especially then, spring didn't arrive with fireworks, it came in fragments. A lighter sky at 6 a.m., the smell of wet earth on her morning walk. A bird, just one, singing outside her window. Emily noticed, not because she was trying to, but because her heart had begun to pay attention again. She started walking the same routes, but they no longer felt the same. The bench in the park didn't feel like a hiding spot anymore. It felt like a place she had grown through. One morning she passed the bookstore where she met Mia. She paused, peered through the glass. It wasn't just a bookstore anymore, it was a beginning. She whispered thank you to no one, to the past version of herself maybe, or to the city for holding her gently through the ache. That week, she opened a blank document on her laptop, title, "How to Breathe Again." She didn't know what she was writing, but words spilled, memories, metaphors, moments. She didn't write for clicks, she wrote for clarity, each sentence a mirror, each paragraph a bridge. After 2 weeks, she published it anonymously on a blog platform, no expectations, just release. It felt like exhaling after holding her breath for a year. A few days later, someone commented, "Thank you, I felt every word. I didn't know how to say it, but this is me." Emily stared at the screen, smiled, cried a little, not out of sadness, but because being seen by a stranger was a kind of magic. She wrote again the next week. And again after that, tiny essays, letters to her past self, soft reminders like, "You are still worthy when no one is clapping," or "It's okay if the light takes its time." She didn't share them widely, didn't promote, but the page views grew slowly, organically, and that wasn't the point, but it felt like resonance. She wasn't trying to teach, she was just telling the truth. One afternoon, she sat on the library steps, sketchbook in her lap, breeze in her hair. The sun touched her skin like an old friend. She thought about how far she hadn't come. She still had anxiety, still overthought texts, still got overwhelmed at grocery stores. But she no longer saw those things as defects. She saw them as textures, proof she was human, soft, sensing, real. And in that softness she had found her strength. Mia joined her on the steps, handed her an iced latte, no words needed. They sipped in silence, sun on their faces, feet brushing gravel. Emily turned to her and said, "I used to want to escape my life. Now I just want to be in it fully." Mia nodded, eyes kind. "Welcome back." And just like that, spring arrived, not with applause, but with presence. And maybe that's the real blooming, not the world changing, but finally being able to feel it when it does. "You've changed," her coworker said one afternoon, halfway through a meeting. No sarcasm, no commentary, just an observation. Emily blinked. She hadn't done anything unusual. She was just listening, pen in hand, posture soft, eyes steady. But something in the way she was holding herself had shifted. After the call ended, she sat still for a while, letting those two words settle. "You've changed." She hadn't noticed it happening. There was no checklist, no ta-da moment, just days stacked on top of each other, built with intention instead of avoidance. Later that week, her sister called. "You sound different," she said. "How?" "I don't know, calmer, lighter, maybe." Emily smiled, not at the compliment, but at the accuracy. She was fixed. She wasn't always okay, but she no longer carried herself like she was broken. One evening, she ran into an old college friend at the grocery store. They hugged. Exchanged the usual, "How are you?" "Still in Boston." "Works good." And just before they parted ways, her friend turned back and said, "You seem more you." That night, Emily sat by her window with her tea and let those words echo. More you, not more successful, not more productive, not happier, even just more herself. She thought about how, for years, she'd tried to become someone else, smarter, stronger, less sensitive, more efficient. All versions of her that fit into other people's comfort zones. And now, without trying, she had returned to the version that felt like home, not perfect, not polished, but true. She looked around her apartment, the candle flickering on the table, the sketchbook open, the plant, June, still alive, and she realized it wasn't the rituals that had changed her. It was the way she had shown up for herself inside them. She no longer needed to prove or impress or outperform. She just needed to stay honest, stay soft, stay curious. There's something powerful in subtle change, the kind that sneaks up on you, that lives in your posture, your tone, your quiet. You don't always see it in the mirror, but others do. And one day when they name it, you realize you've been becoming while you were simply being. If no one's told you lately, you've changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but beautifully, and maybe, just maybe, someone will notice. Even if that someone is you. She sat at her kitchen table, the lights soft and golden, a cup of tea cooling beside her, in front of her, a blank sheet of paper. She breathed once, twice, and then she began to write. "Dear me," the pen moved slowly, no rush, no pressure. "Dear me," she wrote again, "thank you for not giving up." She paused, not because the words were hard, but because they mattered. "Thank you for walking when it hurt. For staying when it would have been easier to disappear. For trying, even when trying felt like too much." The letter wasn't for anyone else, not to inspire, not to explain, just to witness. She wrote about the mornings she showed up, the afternoons she spiraled, the nights she stayed present. She wrote about tea and candles and color-coded moods, about Mia's voice notes and the stranger in the park, about painting with a short pencil on cold floors. And somewhere in the middle of the letter, she wrote a sentence she hadn't expected. "I no longer want to escape my life." She stared at those words, let them sit. They felt earned. Because there was a time she believed healing would feel loud, like fireworks, like applause, but now she knew the truth. Healing was quiet, subtle, messy. It looked like folded laundry, like choosing fruit over fear, like writing letters to your past self just to say, "You did your best." She signed the page, "Love me," folded it, slid it into a notebook, not to read again, but to remember she had written it. That night she opened her window, spring air drifted in cool, clean, and she whispered something into the dusk, not a wish, not a prayer, just a promise. "I will meet my life gently. No more battles, no more chasing, just showing up, softly, truly." She didn't have all the answers, but she no longer feared the questions. She didn't have a 5-year plan, but she had presence, and that was enough. She didn't know where this version of her would lead, but she trusted it would be somewhere real, somewhere rooted, somewhere kind. If you're listening to this now and you're somewhere in the middle, not broken but not whole, not lost but not home, let me tell you something. You're not behind, you're not late, you're just unfolding, at your own pace, in your own rhythm, like spring taking its time. If this story felt like yours, if it reminded you of something soft you buried, a version of you that still believes in slow beginnings, I invite you to stay kind, to stay curious, to stay. And if you feel ready, share in the comments what's one thing, just one, that you're reclaiming for yourself. I'd love to read it, truly. And maybe, just maybe, your words will be someone else's soft beginning. So here's to the quiet ones, the slow bloomers, the gentle returners. We're here, we're growing, and we're not going anywhere. It follows Emily, a 28-year-old woman in Boston, as she learns to reclaim her life, not through grand gestures but through small rituals, silent courage, and soft beginnings. If you've ever felt stuck, numb, or quietly lost, this story will remind you that you're not alone. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just waking up and staying. Sparkles, if this story speaks to you, share a moment you're reclaiming in the comments. Let's grow gently together. Hashtags healing journey, hash mental health, self-discovery, gentle growth, quiet transformation, slow living, emotional story, the quiet way back. B letter 1ED9, T letter 1EB, COA 3, T letter 1EA7NG. SEO keywords, T letter 1EA7NG1. CH letter 1E7, D stroke letter 1EC1, chin. Healing journey, emotional growth, personal transformation, T letter 1EA7NG2. T letter 1EB, COA Liern Quan. Restart, mental clarity, bin LU letter 1EAD, and Gim, pinned comment. Seedling, thank you for watching. What's one small thing you're reclaiming for yourself today? Drop it in the comments below. Your words might be the start of someone else's healing too. Speech balloon prompt, T letter 1EA1 O hin letter 1EA3 NH thir NH letter 1ECF. Thumbnail prompt, English. Create a 16:9 thumbnail image for a video titled The Quiet Way Back to Yourself, with a bold subtitle in the image. You don't have to be loud to heal. Visual elements. A close-up of a woman's emotional face. Emily, mid-20s, American, with visible vulnerability, tears in eyes but peaceful expression. Around her, 3-4 different smaller versions of herself representing key moments. Sitting alone on a subway, painting on the floor, walking in the city, drinking tea at sunrise, strong red-toned background for contrast, but softened with warm orange and gold light flares. Text should be large, emotional, and dramatic, placed in the upper half of the image. Style should feel cinematic, emotional, and deeply human. Designed to evoke curiosity and empathy. Style: emotional storytelling, healing, transformation. Text font: bold serif or hand-drawn look, clear and expressive.